Greetings, everyone. It's Naomi Wolf here of Daily Clout, and I'm so honored to have joining us from Israel, Dr. Josh Guetzkow. Welcome, Dr. Guetzkow.
Hi, Naomi. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope I pronounced your name correctly that time. If not, please correct me.
It's Guetzkow. Let's go, Guetzkow.
Let's go, Guetzkow. Gotcha. I beg your pardon, Dr.
Right.
Guetzkow.
No problem.
So I'm so happy to have you. You've been one of the most vocal investigators of the COVID mRNA injection rollout, and one of the most distinguished. You publish frequently in The Defender. You have your own Substack, which is researchrebel.substack.com. And you're also a very distinguished sociologist. So one of the reasons I'm especially impressed with you being so forthcoming about what you're finding or what you're willing to find is that you're broadcasting from one of the most heavily vaccinated countries in the world, which is Israel. And you're an Israeli academic, or you're an academic in Israel. I don't know how Israeli you are. I presume fully Israeli at this point. But before we get any deeper, did you want to respond to what I just said?
Yeah, it's interesting. Israel was very gung-ho about the vaccination drive. And unlike in the US, where there was some partisan divisions about it, in Israel, it was across the political spectrum. Everybody was in favor of it, except for a very small minority. Mm-hmm. However, times have changed, and I think that people's views on the mRNA vaccines has shifted a lot. Nobody here is really getting vaccinated anymore. There's a very small percentage of people who are, getting their annual boosters and that sort of thing. So definitely things have changed. On the other hand, politically, it's still a non-issue. Like the idea that there would ever be some kind of commission of inquiry or official investigation or accounting for what happened and what was done is not in the cards, as far as I can tell.
That's so interesting, and also bizarre, right? I mean, it seems like separating cause and what you expect to be effect. I mean, if people are aware now that there are problems with this injection, it seems extraordinary that there's no political blowback. But I believe you, and I partly believe you because, it's such a small country, and the dissident media is tiny, and who knows how much of independent news and investigation from outside of Israel gets into Israel. I don't know. What's your analysis for why there's no political blowback? It seems weird.
Well, I don't think it's an interesting question. What I want to say is that because it was supported, by politicians of all political stripes, so who's left to make an accounting?
Exactly.
But maybe you could say something like that similarly about the UK, where there is at least some kind of commission, although a lot of it is a whitewash. So
totally.
Yeah, it's an interesting
you're right.
question.
There's no one is innocent. As I recall, even the rabbis and the formal rabbinate were promoting the injection.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
For the most part.
So I just want to share with people your incredibly distinguished bio. You are, wow, so many accolades. I'm just looking at one of at your page on Children's Health Defense. So Josh Guetzkow is a senior lecturer. This may be a little old. It's from probably 2023 in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the Institute of Criminology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He received his PhD from Princeton University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard University with the Robert Wood Johnson Scholars in Health Policy Research Program. He's received no financial support for his work on vaccine safety and has no conflicts of interest to declare. And many other accolades. I'm looking at a CV of yours, again, a little significantly out of date because it's from 2015, but so many awards and accolades, high honors BA, postdoc fellowship, lecturer at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology in the Institute of Criminology at the Hebrew University, co-organizer of the Jerusalem Forum on Criminal Justice, Institute of Criminology and School of Law, many accolades, ad hoc reviewer for American Journal of Sociology, wow, American Sociological Review, Journal of Quantitative Criminology, grant awards, teaching at the Hebrew University, and no doubt many more in the 13 years since. I like to read the incredible qualifications of many of my interviewees because, people like you and Dr. McCullough and Dr. Risch and so on are, there's an effort to marginalize critics of this rollout as wackos or, ill-informed rednecks. And obviously you're right in the belly of the beast academically. You've had nothing but awards and honors and accolades. Walk me through the journey of how you went from being a sociology academic with a focus on criminology to a prominent vaccine critic.
That's an interesting question. I would say one of the key turning points was an email. I was on an email list of criminologists in Israel. And one of my colleagues sent an email to the group saying, here's the thing that we just published in the Israeli version of the Journal of the American Medical Association, sort of the Journal of the Israeli Medical Association. This is a criminologist who had published a book, a book review about this book. Perhaps you've heard of it, Turtles, something about vaccines, Turtles all the way down. Okay, that was originally written by an Israeli physicians who are anonymous. Okay, and all that this colleague of mine was doing was pointing out how odd it was that to somebody with obvious, academic credentials or the ability to, who's clearly has clinical experience and knowledge, didn't feel comfortable to publish a book under their own name just because it was critical of vaccine safety. So he was pointing sort of to the criminological aspects of this. And so I was like, yeah, you know what? That is really weird. And so it got me into understanding, looking into all of the corruptions, not just in vaccine science, but to understand the ways in which medical science in general has been corrupted on many levels by vested interests. Vaccines science seems to be sort of at the core of a lot of that corruption. So then we started a research project where we're talking with physicians and doctors and researchers whose work had been, published papers had been retracted because the papers called into question the safety of certain vaccines. And so it just kind of got rolling from there, where I understood there's kind of a concerted effort to, heaven forbid that anybody should be vaccine hesitant, and therefore there's this sort of concerted effort to make sure that anything that might raise doubts about the safety of vaccinations remains marginalized, suppressed, etc.
Right. Interesting. And so this brings us to the next obvious question. In a society in which people writing very important books like Turtles All the Way Down feel the need to kind of hedge against full disclosure of their identity, have you had blowback?
So one of the advantages of being a social scientist is that people don't necessarily take me as seriously, and they don't necessarily view me as a threat.
Gotcha.
I did have some local blowback at my university when I was early on in the vaccination campaign. So we had a thing in Israel where just very shortly after they started vaccinating the population, they initiated the Green Pass, where right? This was like this thing where if you wanted to sort of be a functioning member of society and be able to go places, and especially for our students to be able to come to class, they had to either show proof of vaccination or recent infection, or that they weren't themselves infected. And I was pointing out to my students in one of my larger classes the ethical problems of this, and pointing to them explaining to them where the roots of ethics and research comes from. It comes from the Jewish experience in the Holocaust and what the Nazis did, right?
Right.
And so you would think that,
Mhm.
you know, they might. I'm on the IRB board at my university, and I wrote to my colleagues. I said, "How can we? Does
Excuse
anybody
me.
want to join me?" Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Getzkow, explain that means internal review board?
Institutional review board is essentially an ethics board that approves that research that's done at the university
Gotcha.
follows ethical guidelines.
Okay,
Again,
thank
this all comes out of the experience of the Holocaust.
you. Mhm.
And I wrote to my colleagues. I said, "Does anybody else want to join me in writing a letter to the rector objecting to this policy of essentially coercing students
Mhm.
to be vaccinated with an experimental, drug that's still under experimental use authorization?" Nobody answered me. Nobody even responded to that email.
Wow.
Anyway, back to the students. So I'm telling them about this, and then I'm showing them this is March, okay, March 2021. I'm showing them some statistics from the European Union, all of these adverse event reports that were rolling in. Before the class ended, I had an email waiting for me in my inbox from the rector of the university, written to the head of my department and my dean, saying, "I've received a complaint that Josh is inciting against the vaccine campaign and comparing it to the Holocaust. Please investigate."
Oh my God. So this,
Yeah,
I just want to jump in and say this is exactly the methodology of harassment that Dr. Mark Crispin Miller at NYU also sustained when he asked his students in a class on propaganda to look at the propagandistic nature of the mask mandate campaign.
right.
A letter to his department head. And this is just for people who are not academics, this is a very serious way of threatening academic free speech and really threatening academics. Wow. So then what happened, Dr. Guetzkow?
Luckily, luckily the class was recorded because we weren't teaching face to face at that time,
Mhm.
um, and and I was able to show this idea that I was comparing to the Holocaust was just a student's complete misunderstanding of what I was trying to say. So
Right.
I showed my department head the recording, and he was like, "Yeah, you're right," and he went to bat for me. He
Good.
said, "We really believe in academic freedom," so I appreciate him for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just the absurdity of that situation, and it did, it just sort of makes you think twice, about speaking out again in the future and saying
Yes.
something. So,
Well,
but
let
other
me.
than that, I
Yeah.
haven't really had blowback.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. And we'll get into the, centerpiece of our discussion today in just a minute, which is I reached out to Dr. Guetzkow to speak about a preprint, which has made a lot of waves, observed to expected fetal losses following mRNA COVID-19 vaccination in early pregnancy. And he's one of the authors of this preprint, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But I want to delve a little bit into the Israeli context again, because I think it's so important in the Jewish context.
Mhm.
First of all, what you said, people need to understand that the Nuremberg um, Code, which is a global law governing medical experimentations, that makes it very clear. It's a very simple, brief paragraph saying you can't coerce people into a medical experimentation. They have to have full disclosure. They have to have the right to say no. It's very simple, clear language. It did
Yes.
literally come out of Nazi medical experimentation and the Nuremberg trials. For atrocities done to Jews by the Nazis. And one thing I just want to remind everyone about is that medical experimentation in the Holocaust was real. There were really doctors like Dr. Mengele who really, engaged in horrific medical experimentation on living, unconsenting, incarcerated, starving people. And not only that, I just want to remind everyone that even before the Nazis formally came to power in 1933, they had enlisted doctors and professional doctors organizations to be the advance guard, kind of whitewash the discourse about health and hygiene that led to some of the very early mercy killings, Nazi killings, medicalized killings, in that case, again, in the very early 30s, of mentally disabled teenagers. So I just want to say that model, and you can look into this deeply in books like The Nazi Doctors by Robert J. Lifton, that model of a book called Racial Hygiene, which is very important, of kind of corrupting the medical societies to do the bidding of eugenicists, essentially, was thoroughly worked out by the Nazis. And I'm giving you this little flashback in history for those who are not aware of it, because to fast forward to Israel, Dr. Guetzkow, Israel knows this, right? Israelis know this history. So do you think it's trauma that led to them not saying, like you just obviously said, wait a minute, there are echoes here. This is not informed consent. This is coercion. This violates our own knowledge of our own history. That's my first question.
I don't have a good answer for that. I think people can convince themselves of all kinds of things. They should have been aware of it. They should have been aware of it, if only because it was Pfizer that was concocting, was using Israel as a lab. And if you go back to like the founder of Pfizer, Theodore Pfizer, has a long ties to the Nazis. And by the way,
I think what? Could you say more about that?
There's a German guy that I've been talking with, who's done a lot of research on that. And I don't want to say any more of that because I don't want to say something that's wrong. But he talked about the Pfizer Foundation and its links to the Nazis. And by the way, that it's important. I think your background about the Nazis and the eugenics is important. But to take even a further step back, we have to keep in mind that the eugenics movement was not a Nazi creation. It was a creation of the Western elites in the England and America, and all of the elites, the Rockefellers, and they were all huge supporters of eugenics and the theory of eugenics. And there's been some really important work that's been done on this. I can recommend some people that you might want to talk to about it. And the German version of it, the Nazis, was sort of the apotheosis of that, but it wasn't. It was fully supported by Western elites.
Totally.
And it wasn't just a Jewish thing. It was, anyway. I don't know. I talked with colleagues at the time that were saying, well, they did the big study, right? The 40,000 people study, and they found that it was safe. So what do you want? And we need to protect, if we're going to be trading off between people's sort of rights to, I have colleagues in the law school that were writing papers talking about how this made sense to that, there was a balance of people's rights to be protected versus people's rights to,
So in other words,
it's all it's all sort of predicated on the safe thing. And as as we've talked about, and is your team and me and my colleagues have sort of independently discovered that the Pfizer vaccine trial, the actual vaccines that were used, that were given to the public, were only tested on 250 people, not 40,000 people.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't have an explanation for it. People just can be blinded and convince themselves of all kinds of insanities.
Yeah.
If history teaches us anything, it teaches us that.
For sure. It also sounds, again, very familiar. If your law school colleagues were writing defenses, it means, I'm sure, that I would find the same kind of money flow to the universities, and to the Israeli media, as we mentioned, to the rabbis.
They weren't, maybe some of them were getting grants, but that wasn't it. They really believed it. I think that is almost scarier than thinking that people are just completely corrupted, that they will they will do evil things and things that are just morally wrong, convinced that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah,
They're so
Israel
thoroughly
turned
convinced
into
of it.
its own little Zimbardo experiment, just like other nations
Yeah.
around the world. And then the last thing I want to ask about specific to Israel before we get into your incredibly important preprint is the DNA, right? And I know you're a sociologist. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I was struck that I gather from early articles that the administration, the Israeli administration power at the time of the agreement forged with Pfizer, at least in relation to Israel, basically gave Pfizer research rights over the Israeli population. And I've got to wonder if some of that is, I mean, I know Iceland was very much targeted by, by the eugenicists for what may be a similar reason, but we've got a really interesting DNA history, right?
Mm.
And the kind of CRISPR, mRNA harvesting, DNA harvesting kind of underpinnings of this whole thing does make me wonder if Israel was a particularly juicy target for these eugenicists because of kind of the concentration of historic DNA in the Israeli population.
I couldn't speculate on any of that. I don't know that. What I do know is that there are a lot of people out there that are still convinced that the vaccines that Israelis received were placebos, and it was just a Jewish plot to show the world that they were safe so they could poison everybody else. And
Oh,
one of
wow.
the things I show in my research, in my post on this paper at my blog, is a link to a documentary that was made by an Israeli woman, one of the very first of this type, to show the harms that were being done to Israelis from the COVID vaccinations. And there's a link to that with English subtitles. It's very worth watching, especially for any of your viewers who might be um, believing in those types of conspiracy theories.
Thank you very much. And, again, I've got to, like, that the mind boggles. No matter what the catastrophe that befalls the Jewish people, someone out there is going to make a conspiracy out of it that, this is actually, us
Right.
saving ourselves and damning the rest of the world.
Right.
But
It's like,
let's stay safely in the world of facts. You have, there we are. Co-authored, along with Tzai Patalon, Sivan Gazit, Tracy Beth Hogue, whose byline I've seen before, I believe, Joseph Freeman, Yaakov Segal, and Retzef Levy, a study called Observed to Expected Fetal Losses Following mRNA COVID-19 Vaccination in Early Pregnancy. And this is a very, very important preprint. Now, it is not yet peer-reviewed, which is the definition of a preprint. That doesn't mean it won't be peer-reviewed. I'm sure you'll catch us up on that. But I want you to walk us through it. And basically, to me, it's extremely important because obviously, our team independently found horrific drops in fertility in various data sets. Amy Kelly found a drop in fertility in Canada. Igor Chudov found drops in fertility in 13 to 20% in various government databases around the world. The Czech Republic has a new study out that showed a dramatic drop in fertility linked to or correlated with the mRNA injection. And we know by now the mechanism by which the injection can cause infertility in women. It's multiple mechanisms. But you looked at pregnancies in Israel with last menstrual period between March 1st, 2016 and February 28th, 2022. And then your main analysis presents observed to expected comparisons of the number of eventual fetal losses among pregnant women exposed to mRNA COVID vaccination, almost all Pfizer, during gestational weeks 8 to 13 and 14 to 27, respectively. Women vaccinated for the flu as well as women vaccinated prior to pregnancy for COVID-19 or flu, were used as comparative controls. And another reason this is so important is it's a big analysis. You analyzed 226,395 singleton pregnancies, meaning not twins, not triplets, and you found a correlation with dose 1 during weeks 8 to 13. So the first trimester into the second trimester was associated with higher than expected observed numbers of fetal losses of approximately 13 versus 9 expected for every 100 exposed pregnancies. So I'll stop there, and because those are the headlines to me, and I will ask you to talk about this study and walk us through it.
Okay. So the main approach of the study, this observed to expected, is a common approach that's used in studies of a number of different things, including vaccine safety. So what they would normally do is they'll say, okay, here's the number of this adverse event that we would expect to see in this population over 3 months or a month or whatever. So now that's what we would expect to see. Now let's look at what we have actually observed in this population after vaccination. So for example, they did this with myocarditis. The CDC looked at this in the summer of 2021, and they said, okay, so among this age group of males, we would expect to see over 3 weeks, 5 cases of myocarditis, and we saw 40 or whatever the numbers were. So this is cause for concern. So we're basically taking that approach and we're applying it to this question of pregnancy loss. What we do that's unique and innovative is that instead of just saying, okay, we're going to look at men in this age range, okay, we're sort of adjusting for individual characteristics. Usually these studies don't do a very good job of that. So what we do is we use the data from the earlier period, 2016 to 2018, to build a statistical model that allows us to predict for any woman, based on her individual characteristics. Is she a smoker? What's her age? What are her comorbidities? All of that stuff. When did she conceive, and in what week of pregnancy is she? What are the chances that she is going to experience a pregnancy loss sort of, before she gives birth? Okay. And then we can basically use that model. We can apply the results of that model to women in the later period and predict, based on the earlier period, what are the chances that this woman is going to experience pregnancy loss. So then we look at all the women that are vaccinated in different weeks, and we say, okay, if this woman was in the 9th week of pregnancy, given what we know about her, what were her chances of experiencing pregnancy loss? And we add all of that up. We get a number. What's the expected number of pregnancy losses we should be seeing in this population? And then we compare that to the observed number. And that's where we get this observed to expected. So we should have expected in these women vaccinated in the first trimester, and we particularly look at weeks 8 to 13. I can explain why. What is the expected number of fetal losses, and what eventually, at some point in the pregnancy, could be a miscarriage, could be a stillbirth, whatever. And what do we actually observe? So we expected to see 9 per 100 women vaccinated, and we saw 13, or a little bit. It's almost 4 additional fetal losses per 100 women. So this is a huge number.
Huge.
And what's even more concerning about it is that most of those pregnancy losses occurred later in pregnancy. So we were seeing more than half of them occurred from week 20 onward. Week 20 onward is considered a stillbirth. So what we're seeing is this: if this is a causal relationship.
Sorry, just jumping in. That's losing your baby at 5 to 6 months. Those are big, painful, dangerous losses.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And almost half of it is from week 25 onward. So even later in pregnancy.
Oh my God.
And so if this is a causal effect that we're seeing, it's a delayed effect, right? We're showing these increased losses, these stillbirths essentially.
Yeah.
And what's maybe it's hard to identify it because because of this sort of delayed response. So that was probably the most surprising and troubling aspect of the study.
So sorry to interrupt you. I beg your pardon.
No problem.
It's just so upsetting, when you elucidate it. What do you mean that it's hard to identify? It sounds like you and your team have created a methodology that clearly identifies.
Yes. What I mean, so that's a great question. First of all, it's hard for women to identify it. So if you had a vaccination and then
I
3 months later so it's hard to kind of draw a connection between those
see,
things.
I see. Because of the time delay? It's interesting that you just literally froze and we cannot.
Sorry, I think I lost you for a second.
Yeah, you sure did.
Are we
Interesting.
okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I just knocked my Ethernet cable connection. I accidentally touched it. I think it.
Okay. I'm glad
So
it's you and not Mossad.
you back?
Sorry, go
Okay,
ahead.
sorry. It was my fault. I touched a cord I
It's fine.
shouldn't have touched.
Please keep going.
So there has been a lot of research done on this topic,
Mhm.
and nobody has found the same problem that we found. Nobody has found a connection between vaccination and pregnancy loss, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One, and goes to your question of this connection. It's hard to find a connection, is because most studies don't look at early fetal loss.
Right.
Most studies look at vaccination later in pregnancy, and we also don't find an association with fetal losses when women get vaccinated later in pregnancy, early pregnancy. But the studies that do look at early pregnancy don't look at what happens throughout the pregnancy. They usually stop at like week 19, week 20.
Right.
So they're going to miss a huge part of the signal of the
Right.
safety, of the safety problems because they're doing this sort of arbitrary cutoff
Right.
at 19 weeks. That's one of the problems. Another problem is it's related to this thing called the healthy vaccinee effect. And the problem with the idea of the healthy vaccinee or healthy vaccinee bias is that vaccinated tend to be healthier on average. No, Naomi, are we still on? I'm sorry, you're a little bit okay.
Yeah.
You got a little bit frozen there for a second.
Mm-hmm. We're good.
Healthy vaccinee effect is basically this idea that people that get vaccinated tend to be healthier on average than people who don't, and they can be healthier in ways we can measure and ways that we can't necessarily measure.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I just compare naively vaccinated women and unvaccinated women, the vaccinated women, even if the vaccine does nothing, are going to appear healthier, right? Because they have this sort of health-seeking, health-conscientious behavior. Yeah,
can I jump in to validate what you're saying there with another piece of evidence? The Shimabukuro study that everyone trumpeted in the Biden administration as saying this injection is safe for pregnant women, literally restricted the women they were looking at to employed nurses who are going to know about nutrition. They're going to have, an income. They've got an education. They're not a random sample of women. And they also cut off before the time period where you're going to see the problems with pregnancies. But please go on.
I was not aware of that about that study. That's very interesting. Yeah, I have a friend who gets renews his health insurance every year, and he has to fill out a survey. And one of the questions they always ask him, do you floss your teeth? Well, it's not because he's getting dental insurance. It's because it's an indication of somebody who takes care of himself.
Interesting.
So this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. And
so your methodology,
most studies look at vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Yes. So our methodology is different. And it doesn't suffer from that. Moreover, when you were reading the abstract, you pointed out that we look at women vaccinated for influenza. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons we do this is because the COVID period was this unique period that you can't really compare it to the past, right? And so what we do is we look at women who are vaccinated for influenza during the COVID period. Okay. And what we find is that actually we find the exact opposite of what we find for the COVID vaccination. So instead of a higher than expected number of pregnancy losses, we see a lower than expected number of pregnancy losses, a much lower than expected, about 5 fewer per 100 women. Why is that? It's not the protective effect of influenza vaccines. Earlier period, 2018 to 2019, we find the same thing. But if you'll recall, there was no influenza during the COVID period, or very little influenza, versus this other period when it was a really bad flu year. So if you're getting the same results when there's flu and when there isn't, it's not a protective effect of the vaccines. It is an indication of healthy vaccinee bias. That these women, there was some,
they're the tooth
getting cut off
flossers.
here a little bit. Hello?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of interruption. I think that's quite interesting. It really began when you got into the meat of this study. Let's just forge ahead, and
I don't know.
we'll get everything out that we can. And if we don't get the essentials out, I will run a transcript of this interview so that at least your words will get out to the world. Please keep going, Dr. Guetzkow. Nope, we are completely. All right, Israel. No one wants to let
hopefully
Dr.
this will. So essentially, so here's the myth. So we're comparing. I think there might be just something wrong with my internet connection. I don't know.
You're a hopeful man. I don't think there's anything wrong with your Ethernet connection at all. That is not whatever.
All right.
I'm interested.
You're like all chopped up for me. I'm having trouble. Okay, here we go. I think we're back.
Let's try for 5 more minutes, and if we can't proceed technically for 5 more minutes, I guess we could do a phone interview later at another time that I can record, hopefully, and stream to the world so that your words will not be cut off.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we're good. I think we're back now. I think you're not.
Let's try.
Can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
Oh, okay. All right. So essentially, I was talking about the comparison with the influenza vaccine. The COVID vaccine, influenza vaccine, they showed totally different associations, right? What we have higher than expected for COVID, lower than expected for influenza. Influenza, the reason it's lower than expected is there's something about them, about their pregnancies. It's going well. They're going out, they're getting vaccinated. So it's a healthy vaccinee bias, right? It means that that is explaining this result. And what it points to the possibility that, and the likelihood that the women who are getting the COVID vaccines should look like the women getting the influenza vaccine. And if that is true, then the additional number of fetal losses isn't 4, it's closer to 9 per 100 women. If that makes sense, right? Because instead of comparing these women to what we expected for them, we should actually be comparing them to what we see among women back.
Yeah, you're freezing so badly, Dr. Guetzkow, that I do not think it is productive to continue because you are totally frozen. But I think that you are clearly over the target. We're going to need to, unfortunately.
That's so weird. I don't know.
Not that weird. You found something very, very important. Well, you guys, we're going to pause, unfortunately, because of technical disturbances between my feed and Dr. Guetzkow's. Maybe totally coincidental, but I think you can safely assume that you hear the unmediated, uncensored, important news here on Outspoken, and we're not going to leave it there. We're going to find a way to get Dr. Guetzkow's overview and his very, very important study out to you, whether it's going to be a follow-up interview over the phone, whether it's using another platform, who knows? It'll be very interesting to see if all of our technological communication doesn't work. But Dr. Guetzkow, I think we need to pause it, because there's just so much interference. Where do people find you and the study in the meantime? And you are completely frozen. So I will tell people where to find Dr. Guetzkow. You've got to go to Substack, and his Substack is researchrebel.substack.
I'm on. Oh no,
you're totally frozen. Yeah, researchrebel.substack.com.
Okay.
and the, the preprint again is expected
I'm
to
I'm
say
wondering if
about,
I should leave. Maybe let me leave the studio and come
and then
back.
come back on. Let's try it. We have a very patient, devoted following. There are over 1,600 people watching
Let
live.
me.
So let's try it. We'll say
Okay.
goodbye to you. I'll keep talking and then you'll come back on. All right. So you can see Loki napping in the background there. He's an influencer star. Lots of thumbs up for Loki. And he just has an incredible ability to nap at the drop of a hat. And Roscoe, our old friend Roscoe, now called Roscoe Singh, says, "Good to see you. Sorry they are effing with your feed. Don't let the bastards grind you down." I literally, don't know why we got interrupted so dramatically in a line, Israel, so dramatically that nothing was clear. Let's see how that is. Welcome back, Dr. Guetzkow.
Oh, I don't think it's
Sorry,
thanks. I don't think this is better.
you don't
Be a
think it's
little better. I don't know.
well? Why don't
You're
you
still
tell?
chopped up.
I'm
I'm
still chopped
probably
up.
choppy.
Okay. Why don't
I don't know.
that's interesting. That means, you know what that means? That means people in Israel can't hear me, and people in the rest of the world, or at least in the United States, can't hear you clearly because my feed and visuals have been fine in the United States. Isn't that fascinating? Um, so we need to pause, Dr. Guetzkow, and I just want to let people know where they can find the preprint to read it, and then I'll find a way to complete this interview with you that cannot be interrupted. So where's the
All
preprint,
right.
please, or the title of the preprint?
Okay.
No, it's not working.
Observe to expected. Was no.
Okay, I'll find it. I'm calling it up right now. Observed to
All right.
expected pregnancy loss, fetal
Observe to expected fetal
fetal
losses
losses following
following
mRNA
mRNA COVID
COVID
vaccination.
vaccine. And I'm going to share my screen again so that
Okay.
everyone can see it, even though you have been silenced. Your work is not silenced.
Yeah.
People can go to medrxiv.org and search for this. I actually had a lot of trouble. Google doesn't want anyone to find it. I had to ask Dr. Guetzkow where to find it or how I could find it, because when I looked up Israeli fertility study Guetzkow, et cetera, it did not come up, at least in the United States, on Google. So you really want to go to MedRx right here. You can see it. And I'm just going to scan down because Dr. Guetzkow is being censored in some way, perhaps, inadvertently, technologically, perhaps not. We don't know. And it's a very, very important analysis, again, of 226,395 pregnancies in Israel, showing 13 versus 9 expected for every 100 exposed pregnancies. And again, as Dr. Guetzkow said, many of them late in pregnancy. And so go there and read this, and I will find a way to finish the interview and let Dr. Guetzkow walk you through all the details and implications in a way that won't be interrupted. Anything else, Dr. Guetzkow? And you are thoroughly frozen, so I'm going to have to say goodbye.
No.
No.
All right.
Okay, but you guys, last thing I want to say, you get the science you support. So if you want to not support independent scientists and sociologists doing real studies and telling you the truth without conflicts of interest, don't just sit on the couch. But if you want real science, this is an incredibly important study that Dr. Guetzkow and his colleagues have produced. I really encourage you to become a paid subscriber, if you accept them, Dr. Guetzkow, of Dr. Guetzkow's Substack. It really makes a difference for independent researchers, and we have to start understanding that we can't count on the CDC, the FDA, whatever the administration is, to protect real science. We have to support the real scientists. Dr. Guetzkow, thank you. I'm so sorry you are completely unreachable, but we will find a
Wow.
way to bring your
Okay.
important message to the world. And
Thank you.
I'll link to
All
your study and keep promoting it. Thank you so
right.
much for beginning to bring us this important message. Bye-bye.